So welcome to another video from theplayersaid.com. My name's Alexander, and today we're doing another from cover to cover video. So today we're taking a look at The Gods Will Have Blood by Anatole France, or France, which is a wonderful name, by the way, Anatole France, because this is a book about the French Revolution, written by a French author who has the name France. Love it. I also, when I was like 15, I had an English teacher called Mr. English, and he was my history teacher. But we were learning about we were doing what causes of World War II, and it was like Mr. English was teaching. I thought it was funny. Great name, by the way. So this is the Penguin Classics edition from this is an old version of this book, and by old I mean this is a 1987 printing, so this book is older than I am, which isn't saying much, but here we are. The Gods Will Have Blood is a book that was, I'm not going to use the word recommended, but at WBC in 2022, we met Dan Bullock for the first time. Dan Bullock's a war game designer. He's a board game designer, let's put it that way. He's designed some war games and other board games. But he taught us a bunch of his games. We've played a lot of his stuff over the course of the years that's kind of available. And he showed us at the time, again, summer of 22, a prototype for his game, The Gods Will Have Blood, the same name, based on this book. And it looked very cool, and he was like, it's this little solo thing, and it's kind of abstract, and it's a little bit esoteric with the cards and narrative and what you do with it. But it's also very heavily based in the book. And so he offered to send me, at the time, like a prototype. So I don't have a box or anything. I've got the cards. I got a little PDF printout of the first set of rules and a bag of cubes, which was very gracious to send me. He sent that over, and I was like, well, if I want to enjoy this book, or this game, I better have the context for it. So I picked this up. It's about a 250-page novel. It's obviously a translation. It's written in French originally, and as such, you always have those literary, not hurdles, but like considerations that this is a translation. And as such, how much of the original author's style and specifics get carried over. Most of the time, a lot of that gets carried over, but how much gets lost? How much gets set aside for stylistic or artistic reasons, and where do we stand with that? So you have an element of that in this, as you do with every translation. Just know that going in. But all in all, what I would say is that I really enjoyed this book. It's 250 pages, which is not very long, especially for a novel. And this is about it's about a gentleman who is a very idealistic, to the point of quite dangerous, young Frenchman during the French Revolution. You see it's got the picture of Marat on the front of him dying, and he does die during the course of the book, so take that to the bank. But basically Gamelin is he's like a young man, but he's generally quite poor, lives in a fairly destitute situation. But he loves the idea and the ideals of the revolution, and it's about his journey into that and everything that happens along the way. And it is a very interesting study on youth and idealism and corruption and like honor, heroism, and sacrifice, as well as like charity and love and brotherhood. There's so much that's going on here, but understand that the book was written in like 1912, and so it is almost Dickensian in its style. I love Charles Dickens. Charles Dickens is one of my favorite authors. I don't have a problem with that. This is probably, I would say, again, partly the translation, a slightly more naive version of a Dickensian novel, if that makes any sense to anyone. It's not quite, it doesn't reach those same heights, but I think part of that is because it's a translation, but also because it's, in its style, a little derivative. Not in like a bad way, but just like he's writing in that style. I really liked what went on in the book, though. I thought the book was very interesting, and it shows not just like this is a yeah. Don't want to give any spoilers away, but the book's 100+ years old. But basically, Gamelan gets caught up in things and is asked to sit as a juror and a judge in some of the revolutionary cases in the revolutionary courts, which are inside churches, and you get that whole like, you know, state and religion and the parts that those play within the course of the revolution as well. And it's about him trying to dole out judgments and the glory that he might receive because of those. It's a really neat book. I really enjoyed it. I am also glad that it was only 250 pages. I think if it had gone on any longer, it probably would have overstayed its welcome a little bit. But this is also, and this is the one thing that I will say about this book, is that this book, because Gamelan is an artist, there is a significant amount of artistic imagery in this. Specifically, some old like Renaissance style paintings that I had to Google, because they talk about, hey, you know, this thing looked like this thing, or like, oh, in this moment his face resembled this part of this painting, and it like, if you know anything about like, you know, classics, ancient history, you can guess what they mean by that. But being able to have the internet and look at those paintings, you really can get that extra little morsel of what was meant by that, and maybe what those expressions looked like, and the underlying meanings behind those. So if this will reward that extra layer of digging up some of the paintings and the pictures and looking at that. Because they tell you very early in this book, they tell you very early what's going to happen, but they do it through the medium of these paintings that get talked about. And if you know anything about the paintings or the stories that are represented in the paintings, you know what's going to happen. Effectively, he gets ahead of himself. He gets himself tangled up in bad things and gets himself accused. There's a reaction where he ends up dying, but his death as an extremist within the revolution is part of the revolution because it can end that extremism. And it's a very interesting kind of a passage at the end with him on the back of a cart being trundled off to be guillotined. It's fascinating stuff. But I would recommend giving this a read, but I also appreciate that this probably isn't for everyone. But if you like or are interested in the revolution, and this is historical fiction about it, so you get a lot of the people and some of the events that happen in the revolution in this, but it is historical fiction. But I enjoyed it, and for 250 pages, you do a lot worse, is what I would say. So, let's talk about The Gods Will Have Blood. This is not a review of Gods Will Have Blood. I don't have a final copy of it. At some point, I might get it, but I also, this is the full game. I don't necessarily need it, but I don't have a fancy box or anything, so don't judge my components. But effectively, what you're doing in the game is that you're trying to cast judgment on this deck of I don't want to say victims, that feels mean, of defendants, and most of them you have to are bad. And you trying to sentence them to death or sentence them to prison, you sentence them. And then on the back of the card, so you read it and it's got some text, and the text, a lot of these cards are characters from the book, some of them are additional, just so there's enough to have a game out of it. But you read the narrative, and the narrative does not tell you a lot. It has some like narrative or literary clues in it, where this person might be guilty or they might not. So let me read one, for example. So this is Sophia Rochemeyer. Since the latest offering of a husband, since the latest offering of 100 sol reward, denunciations have flowed into the Committee of Vigilance. Cyprien Rochemeyer was in possession of a letter detailing members of the convention that may be won over by offerings of money or a lucrative government post. It is known that her assistance was instrumental in your appointment as magistrate. So, the question is, are you going to sentence this person to death, or are you going to let them live? And you decide, depending on what you decide to do, you're going to flip the card over, and you're going to draw some cubes from the bag, and the cubes are either going to be red or white. And if they're all red, the courts want that person dead, and hopefully your decision lined up with them. But if the majority of the cubes are white, they want to be seen as merciful, so they will pass a mercy judgment on that person. But if you could condemn them to death, you look like a bit of a radical. It's not great. And so you get into this wonderful dance of condemning people to death, because this poor lady has a list implicating your guilt as maybe having been purchased as a favorable juror. So do you have her axed or not? And if your ruling is in favor, then your legitimacy goes up. But if your ruling is not in favor of whatever the people want from that drawback, your legitimacy goes down, because you've been axing people who could implicate you, and everyone knows it. But those clues are, that's just it, they're clues. This isn't like a specific game. It's a very abstract, esoteric game, which I really enjoyed, and is peak Dan Bullock. But basically, you have this little crossing track here, and your legitimacy you need to have up as the court legitimacy, so that you look like you're a fair and impartial judge. But you also need your Jacobean reputation to be nice and high as well. So that you're both an impartial and fair judge, and the court is seen as being legitimate, but you're also killing the enemies of the revolution, and that you're a good Jacobean. But there's these spaces in the middle where it's just one spot, and the pieces cannot move past each other. And so you might have, if you've got one part there and one down here, you might be able to increase your reputation, but it can't go past your court legitimacy. So you need your court legitimacy to rise before you can get your reputation in order. And so it's this little moving these two tracks and keeping it high. But then on top of that, there are 3 cards in this deck which are blue, and those are from the book, those are like your friends and family. And you had better done saved them, because if you don't, you're going to lose the game as well, because you're trying to, help those people. And if you can't get them helped, it's, the judgment bag. If you get caught being favorable to them when you're not supposed to, the judgment bag gets much worse. They put a bunch of red cubes in there so that you, have to convict a whole bunch of other people to cover up for the fact that you maybe saved that one person. But then the momentum of the court gets out of control, and you're like, oh no, you can't get a decision to go any way that you don't want it to. It's very, very, very interesting. But what I would say is if you have a chance to get this game, it is a solitaire-only, very small little game. I really enjoyed it because it is very different from what we do on the channel. And I thought that for a small little game, it did a really fun job of putting you in that little aspect of this, where he's sat passing judgments, and sometimes that momentum of that court gets out of your control, at which point you're seen as too extreme, and then you're going to be off with your head, kind of a thing. You see some of those themes in here, but this book is so much more than that. I actually really enjoyed the artistic side of this book, which I wasn't expecting. I didn't know that that's kind of how much of that was going to be in here. But if you're an art history major, or you're taking some art history classes, I think you're going to really enjoy this book as well, for it being historical fiction. But yeah, there's a few other games that I've played about the French Revolution, but I feel like not that many, and most of them maybe aren't that serious. So I think there was a game that we played called it was called Guillotine. It was called Guillotine or something like that. Then there was also a game, gosh, I think it was from Osprey a while back, called Let Them Eat Cake, that was really fun. That was almost like a family game where you're like making these cakes and, you know, it's not great. Yeah, but that was a fun little game. But that was, you know, we've got The Gods Will Have Blood, the game. We have that. But what I would like to hear from everyone is some more French Revolutionary games. Because I've got plenty of games out there that kind of talk about, you know, things later on. You know, you go from the revolution like almost immediately into like the rise of Napoleon. We've talked about Napoleonics a lot on this channel, but those aren't the revolution, you know. And so, if you have good French Revolution games, let me know. Like maybe some tactical game within Paris, or maybe a grander strategic game with the imperial armies converging on Paris. What does that look like? Maybe I'm just ignorant and don't know those, but if you know some good French Revolution games, please let me know, because I would be interested. One of my favorite novels is A Tale of Two Cities, which is a book about the French Revolution. So this kind of fit nicely alongside that. So it is something that I have interest in, but maybe don't know as much about as I would like to. So put that in the comments if you have any good French Revolution games. But I do recommend Anatole France's The Gods Will Have Blood. And if you want a little solo game, which puts you with some interesting moral dilemmas, as well as being incredibly challenging, like almost impossible, The Gods Will Have Blood has a game by Dan Bullock. He published it independently, I believe, so just shoot him an email and you might be able to get a copy, but I think those are going to dry up pretty quickly. But yeah, I appreciate everyone for sticking around and tuning in, but I'm Alexander from Players8.com.